CIA's inhumane experiments exposed the winter of 1950 was colder than memory. A season where fear drifted through America like unseen ash from a silent fire. Behind government walls, unease spread as whispers of enemy mind control traveled faster than truth could anchor itself. In dimly lit offices, men in gray suits traced imagined threats across maps, convinced invisible wars were already underway. Every newspaper headline fed the same dread, that the future might belong not to armies, but to those who mastered the human mind. The Central Intelligence Agency, still young yet hungry for power, sensed opportunity in this rising fog of national anxiety. Its leaders believed that to defend the country, they must reach deeper into the psyche than any adversary dared attempt. Within their ranks, ambition thrived, moral caution, however, slowly eroded beneath the weight of strategic desperation. They found allies among scientists who feared falling behind the world's great powers more than they feared their own conscience. Windowless laboratories were prepared in military bases, hospitals, and private institutions, each disguised by routine paperwork. But inside, an unsettling quiet reigned, broken only by the soft hum of machines and the scratch of pens on classified files. Those who entered signed forms they barely read, trading ethical certainty for loyalty to a nation trembling at its own shadow. The program that soon emerged carried a name harmless enough to hide the darkness it concealed, a cluster of letters, MK and Ultra. Few outside the inner circle knew the meaning, and those who did carried the knowledge like a burden tied tightly to their ribs. The project promised breakthroughs in interrogation, influence, and psychological endurance, all cloaked in patriotic necessity. Yet the questions that should have stopped the program were stifled before they found breath, buried under layers of secrecy. In field reports, subjects were described only as assets, variables, or numbers, never as the living humans they truly were. Within agency hallways, the line between scientific exploration and human violation thinned until it nearly disappeared. Some researchers hesitated, sensing they were stepping into territory where ethics dissolved like smoke in a drafty room. But the machinery of national fear pressed onward, convincing them that any boundary could be bent for the sake of survival. Rumors surfaced among lower-level staff of strange deliveries, locked crates, and requests for unmarked medical supplies. A nurse at a remote hospital recalled seeing unfamiliar officials escorting patients who never reappeared in public wards. At night, lights glowed behind shuttered windows, flickering like coded signals to a world that had no permission to look in. Meanwhile, families across the country slept unaware that a secret pursuit of control was taking shape in their own backyard. The agency believed that mastering the mind meant mastering destiny, and destiny justified every step into forbidden ground. Thus, the first shadows of MK Ultra spread silently, not as thunder, but as a quiet shift in the air before a coming storm. History would later ask how such a path began, and the answer would lie here, in the locked rooms of 1950 America. For inside those unmarked buildings, the story of the agency's darkest experiment was already unfolding, breath by quiet breath. And, though no one yet knew it, the cost of their ambition would echo for decades. Carried by voices the world had not heard, soft fluorescent light washed the sealed rooms in a pale glow, turning every corner into a silent and watchful witness. Behind reinforced doors, researchers moved with rehearsed precision, their footsteps echoing like distant metronomes. Clipboards filled with coded notes guided their work, masking intentions behind language stripped of human sentiment. No one spoke loudly. Whispers were the currency of survival, traded cautiously in hallways guarded by unreadable faces. In these labs, the agency sought mastery over consciousness, a pursuit hidden beneath layers of patriotic justification. Samples of unfamiliar compounds sat in dark cabinets, labeled only with symbols known to a handful of authorized minds. Each vial represented a gamble, an attempt to unlock the fragile architecture of memory, fear, and suggestion. Subjects were brought in at odd hours, escorted by officers who offered no explanations, only the promise of procedure. Some arrived bewildered, believing they were part of routine evaluations. Others had no chance to form any expectation. The rooms were chilled deliberately, a method designed to unsettle the senses before any questioning could begin. Electrodes rested on metal trays, polished to a sterile shine, waiting like instruments of a ritual no one dared to name. Researchers kept their eyes on their notes, avoiding the gaze of participants whose confusion grew with every minute. They spoke in terms of thresholds, responses, and tolerances, disguising anguish behind the language of experimentation. One scientist, Dr. H., often paused before each session, as if debating the boundaries of his own fading conscience. He told colleagues that knowledge required sacrifice, yet his trembling hands revealed a truth he never spoke aloud. Among the subjects was a veteran who had survived foreign battlefields, unaware he was entering a conflict of another kind. His recollections were recorded obsessively, each memory mapped like contested territory awaiting conquest. Another participant, a young woman from a state hospital, stared blankly as questions spiraled around her fractured identity. Documents later showed she had never consented, her name added to forms that bore signatures she did not write. Experiments unfolded in shifts, day merging into night until time itself felt like another variable to be manipulated. When reactions grew severe, the logs reduced them to mild anomalies, keeping the true weight of suffering concealed. The agency demanded progress, urging teams to push further, convinced that hesitation would invite national ruin. Internal meetings spoke of techniques to reshape perception, to bend truth until the mind accepted manufactured reality. As the program expanded, crates arrived bearing devices whose purpose only a select few were cleared to understand. Even seasoned personnel felt chills when they heard muffled cries from deeper chambers where access was restricted. Yet reports described these events with clinical calm, transforming terror into data and agony into measurable output. Each signature on those reports tethered the program tighter to the souls of those who carried it forward without pause. Outside the walls, the world continued unaware, living ordinary days while history's shadow thickened in secret. Those within the program believed they were shaping the future, but they failed to see the darkness shaping them in return. And so the experiments pressed onward, one session after another, weaving a tapestry of silence the public would not hear. What began as a quest for national security now teetered toward moral collapse, though few recognized the descent. For once the pursuit of control took root, it grew like a creeping vine, pulling every conscience slowly into its grasp. Their stories drifted through the archives like faint echoes, survivors whose lives had been altered beyond repair. Some wandered through city streets, carrying memories fractured into pieces too small for truth to assemble again. Doctors labeled their suffering as coincidence, never noting the cold fingerprints of hidden experiments beneath it. One man, once a soldier of quiet dignity, awoke each night gripped by terrors he could not trace to any battlefield. He spoke of shadows whispering commands, of colors that pulsed behind his eyes long after the drugs had faded away. His family tried to guide him toward healing, unaware that the cause had originated in a lab sealed from public view. A woman in her early 20s drifted between hospitals, her identity stripped by sessions she never understood. She clutched fragments of a life she barely remembered, as if each recollection were a fragile artifact of a lost world. Records revealed she had been transferred without consent, her past rewritten by those who measured pain as data. The agency's reports described her only as a compliant subject, erasing the depth of her terror with a single phrase. Another survivor, a university student, recalled bright lights and voices urging him to surrender his sense of self. He spoke in broken sentences, unable to distinguish dreams from implanted fears seeded during hidden procedures. Friends noticed he avoided reflections, convinced the person staring back was someone the experiments had created. For these individuals, the aftermath stretched across years, forming a quiet tragedy buried beneath official silence. Families pieced together hints from medical bills, missing days, and sudden behavioral shifts no doctor could explain. They wrote letters to institutions, to government offices, to anyone who might illuminate the darkness swallowing them. Most replies were polite refusals, claiming no knowledge of programs that had shaped the fate of their loved ones. In small homes and crowded apartments, relatives gathered around tables, whispering questions no one could answer. Some kept diaries, documenting each painful change as if preserving evidence for a reckoning they feared would never come. Others clung to hope, believing that truth might surface if they simply refused to let silence claim their memories. The victims themselves moved like ghosts through society, present yet distant, carrying invisible wounds that bled slowly. Each attempt to rebuild their lives collided with fragments of induced confusion that surfaced without warning. A few sought therapy, but the origins of their suffering were locked in classified vaults far from any clinic's reach. Therapists witnessed patterns that hinted at external manipulation, yet lacked the authority to name the source aloud. In time, whispers among families intertwined, forming an unofficial network of sorrow spread across the nation. Their shared grief became a quiet rebellion, a refusal to allow their loved ones to vanish into governmental shadows. Though they lacked evidence, they carried something just as powerful, an intuition that their pain was not accidental. Across these connected tragedies, a collective question emerged, haunting each sleepless night with relentless clarity. If such suffering existed, who had authorized it? And how many others had been swallowed by the same unseen machine? The victims had no platform, no protection, only the fragile strength of those determined to reclaim stolen dignity. And, in that determination, the first seeds of exposure were planted, waiting for the moment when truth could break through. For history is shaped not only by power, but by the persistence of forgotten souls who refuse to be erased again. Rumors reach the press like drifting embers, glowing faintly before vanishing into the dense fog of secrecy once more. Journalists sensed a hidden story stirring beneath official statements, a tale too heavy to remain buried forever. One reporter, a patient seeker of truth, noticed patterns in scattered complaints from families spread across the nation. Each letter echoed the same quiet despair, speaking of vanished days, altered minds, and institutions that offered nothing. He traced these threads with growing unease, realizing they all led toward agencies cloaked behind layers of authority. Meanwhile, in Washington, whispers traveled through congressional corridors, carried by aides who feared retaliation. A small circle of lawmakers began to suspect that an unknown program had overstepped moral and legal boundaries. Though evidence was scarce, their instincts sharpened as inconsistencies multiplied inside official medical records. Meetings were held behind closed doors, voices low, the weight of the unknown pressing against each conversation. Some warned that digging deeper would trigger political storms, yet others believed silence would be a greater betrayal. A breakthrough came when a former analyst anonymously mailed encrypted documents to a trusted investigative journalist. The files hinted at secret operations, referencing unidentified subjects and procedures described in chilling vagueness. Though heavily redacted, the documents exposed a pattern of psychological manipulation beyond anything previously imagined. The journalist's heart pounded as he realized he was holding evidence that could unravel decades of tightly kept lies. He reached out to lawmakers willing to listen, forming a fragile alliance driven by shared urgency rather than trust. Together they planned a careful inquiry, aware that any misstep could lead to swift suppression by powerful forces. As they pursued the truth, doors closed around them, phone lines clicked ominously, and familiar faces grew distant. Yet the more pressure they encountered, the clearer it became that they were approaching something immense and forbidden. Late one evening, a whistleblower emerged from the shadows, shaking as he described experiments conducted without consent. He spoke of rooms filled with cold machinery, of minds fractured under chemical trials, and of orders that silenced doubt. His testimony, fragile yet devastating, confirmed fears that had haunted investigators since the first rumor surfaced. The lawmakers recorded every word, knowing this account could ignite the inquiry the public had long been denied. Still, the whistleblower insisted that the horrors he witnessed were only fragments of a much darker hidden system. He warned that documents existed proving the agency had designed these methods deliberately, not as accidents of war. Armed with testimony, the journalists prepared their first report, uncertain whether the truth would be published or buried. As deadlines approached, tension thickened, and each step forward felt like walking deeper into a labyrinth of secrets. Outside, the city moved with ordinary rhythm, unaware that history was tilting toward a revelation long overdue. Inside cramped offices lit by flickering lamps, investigators realized they were no longer chasing rumors but confronting them. And in that moment, the guarded veil surrounding the secret program began to tremble, as if sensing its unraveling. What started as faint whispers had grown into a rising wave, carrying with it the first promise of accountability. The hearings began under bright lights, yet every testimony felt weighted by shadows no illumination could fully dispel. Lawmakers listened in heavy silence as witnesses described lost years, fractured minds, and truths warped beyond repair. Families finally spoke aloud the grief they had carried alone, recounting nights filled with questions that never found rest. Journalists documented each word carefully, aware that history was shifting beneath them like ground unsettled by distant thunder. As classified documents were unsealed, the scale of the program emerged, revealing intent far darker than rumors had suggested. Reports detailed calculated breaches of ethics, describing human minds as resources to be harvested rather than protected. The nation watched in disbelief, realizing that the pursuit of security had crossed lines carved by moral law and human dignity. Still, agency officials denied full accountability, insisting the era demanded choices that modern eyes could not fairly judge. Such explanations rang hollow for survivors who knew the difference between duty and deliberate harm etched into memory. Public outrage surged, yet beneath it flowed a quieter current, a fear of how easily institutions could drift into darkness. Reforms followed quickly, introducing safeguards meant to ensure that research would never again trespass into secret cruelty. Panels were formed to oversee experiments, demanding transparency where once only sealed doors and coded files had existed. For a moment, the nation believed it had learned. The truth once exposed would anchor future generations against repeating the past. But veteran investigators cautioned that secrecy adapts, reshaping itself like smoke slipping through any gap left unguarded. Survivors continued their slow struggle, navigating lives marked by scars officials had once tried to reduce to mere anomalies. Some found fragile healing, while others lived within memories manipulated until even their own thoughts felt untrustworthy. Letters from families kept arriving at government offices, seeking answers still hidden behind layers of forgotten bureaucracy. Though many received apologies, few found closure, for no admission could restore the years consumed by engineered confusion. Historians pieced together the narrative, stitching fact to testimony, creating a record meant to outlast shifting politics. They warned that power, when unchecked, could bend morality until cruelty became another quiet tool of national ambition. Across academic halls, students studied the case as both cautionary tale and evidence of the human cost of secrecy. Yet whispered debates wondered whether every truth had truly surfaced or whether deeper chapters remained sealed away. Some investigators believed additional files existed, locked in vaults unnamed on any official map, awaiting another era. Occasional leaks hinted at procedures even more severe, fragments too jagged to fit neatly into the known timeline. Journalists pursued these traces, but each trail seemed to dissolve just as discovery felt within arm's reach. In time, attention drifted, and the public turned toward newer headlines, leaving unanswered questions to gather quiet dust. Still, those who had glimpsed the depth of the program sensed that history had shown only the parts it allowed to be seen. They understood that truth often hides in the spaces between documents, in whispers guarded by those who fear exposure. And so the legacy of the program lingered, hovering like a silhouette that never stepped fully into the light of accountability. For even as the last hearing adjourned, one unanswered question continued to echo: what remained concealed beyond the revealed? Some say that in a locked room deep within an unnamed facility, A single red file still waits where it has waited for years. And within that file, they whisper, lies the chapter no one was ever meant to read, one capable of reshaping the story again.